October 29, 1941. Winston Churchill returned to Harrow School, the same school where, as a boy, he'd been beaten, bullied, and told he'd never amount to anything. Now, at 66, he was Prime Minister of Britain, leading the free world against Nazi tyranny. The students waited for a grand speech, notebooks ready, expecting wisdom that would fill pages. Churchill stood at the podium, looked out at the young faces, and spoke just 16 words. Never give in, never give in, never, 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 in nothing, great or small, large or petty, never give in. Then he sat down. The room was silent. Some students looked confused. Others began to understand. Because Winston Churchill hadn't just preached these words. He had lived them. Through decades of catastrophic failure, through humiliation, rejection, depression, and defeat, through moments when any reasonable person would have quit. At age 25, he was an international celebrity. By 40, he was called the Butcher of Gallipoli, responsible for 100,000 deaths. At 50, he was politically finished. A washed-up has-been with no future. At 60, he wandered the wilderness, ignored, mocked, dismissed. At 65, when most men retire, he finally got his chance, and he saved the world. This is not a story about talent, or luck, or genius. This is the story of what happens when you refuse to quit, when failure after failure can't break you, when the entire world tells you to give up and you say no. This is the story of Winston Churchill, and it might just change your life. November 1888. 7-year-old Winston Spencer Churchill arrived at St. George's School. Son of a famous politician, grandson of a duke, born into privilege. But young Winston was about to learn that privilege doesn't protect you from pain. St. George's was brutal. The headmaster believed in discipline through suffering. Boys were beaten with birch rods for minor infractions, sometimes until they bled. Winston was beaten constantly, for being slow, for stuttering, for asking questions, for existing. One night, a teacher found Winston in the bathroom, examining the welts and cuts on his back. "Does it hurt?" the teacher asked. 7-year-old Winston looked up, tears in his eyes but voice steady. "Yes, but I won't let them see me cry." That's where it started. Not courage, not confidence, just a refusal to let the pain win. Build to school failures. Winston was transferred to a new school, then another. At Harrow, he was placed in the lowest form, the class for boys who couldn't keep up. While other students studied Latin and Greek, Winston struggled with basic English. His father visited once, looked at Winston with disgust. "You will be a failure," Lord Randolph told his son. "You will disgrace the family name. Most boys would have believed it, internalized it, become it." Winston did something different. He decided his father was wrong, not because Winston felt confident, but because he refused to accept that verdict. Shift to Military Academy. Winston applied to Sandhurst Military Academy, failed the entrance exam, applied again, failed again. Most candidates would have quit after 2 failures. Winston applied a 3rd time, finally passed, graduated 8th out of 150 cadets. That's the first lesson in never giving up. You don't need to be naturally talented. You just need to refuse to stop trying. The wilderness begins. Churchill's early career was brilliant. War correspondent at 23. Member of Parliament at 26, Cabinet Minister at 33, First Lord of the Admiralty at 37, then came Gallipoli. Churchill planned an invasion of Turkey that he promised would end World War I. Instead, it became a catastrophe. 100,000 Allied casualties, thousands of young men dead on Turkish beaches. "Churchill the Butcher!" the newspapers screamed. He was forced to resign in disgrace. Churchill fell into the deepest depression of his life, what he called the Black Dog. He'd later describe it. Black depression settled over me. I thought I might jump in front of a train. Late one night, his wife Clementine found him staring out a window, tears streaming down his face. "It's over," he whispered. "My career, my reputation, everything." Clementine took his hand. "Then start again," she said simply. And he did. Churchill requested a commission in the army. Went to fight on the Western Front. Not as a general, as a lieutenant colonel commanding a battalion in the trenches, from the heights of the Admiralty to the mud of Flanders. Most men would have seen this as the final humiliation. Churchill saw it as a chance to rebuild. He returned to Parliament in 1916, slowly clawed his way back, but the stain of Gallipoli never fully washed away. The Wilderness Years. The 1930s were Churchill's darkest decade. He was out of government, out of favor, out of power. At 60 years old, when most politicians retire comfortably, Churchill was a laughingstock. He spent his days at Chartwell, his country estate, painting, writing, laying bricks. He literally built walls to keep busy. He wrote books and articles to pay his bills. He was often broke, and he warned about Hitler. While the rest of Britain pursued appeasement with Nazi Germany, Churchill stood alone. "Hitler is a threat," he thundered in Parliament. "Germany is rearming. War is coming." They mocked him. Churchill the warmonger, Churchill the drunk, Churchill the has-been who can't accept that his time is over. Politicians stopped inviting him to dinners. His own party sidelined him. At 63, 64, 65 years old, Churchill seemed finished. One evening in 1938, after another ignored speech in Parliament, Churchill sat alone in his study. His secretary found him with his head in his hands. "Perhaps they're right," Churchill said quietly. "Perhaps I am just a relic. Perhaps I should accept that I'm done." Then he looked up, that familiar defiant gleam in his eye. "But I can't, because I'm right about Hitler, and someone has to keep saying it. That's the second lesson. Keep going even when no one believes you, especially when no one believes you." May 10, 1940. Nazi Germany invaded France. Prime Minister Chamberlain, the man who'd pursued appeasement, resigned in disgrace. Britain needed a new leader, and after years of being ignored, mocked, and dismissed, they finally turned to the 65-year-old has-been. Winston Churchill became Prime Minister. But this wasn't a triumph. It was a death sentence. Within weeks, France fell. The British Army was trapped at Dunkirk. Hitler controlled all of Western Europe. Britain stood alone. May 28, 1940. War Cabinet meeting. Lord Halifax proposed using Italy as an intermediary to negotiate peace terms with Hitler. "We cannot win this war," Halifax argued. "Make the best deal we can now." Several cabinet members nodded. It was logical. Reasonable. Churchill stood. "If this Long Island story of ours is to end at last, let it end only when each one of us lies choking in his own blood upon the ground." The room fell silent. "Nations that go down fighting rise again," Churchill continued. "Those that surrender tamely are finished." Then Churchill did something brilliant. He called in the outer cabinet, 25 additional ministers, and asked them one question. Should Britain negotiate with Hitler? One by one they answered. Every single one said, "Fight." Halifax's proposal died. Britain would stand. But standing meant enduring hell, the Blitz, September 1940. For 57 consecutive nights, German bombers darkened the skies over London. Entire neighborhoods reduced to rubble. Thousands killed, tens of thousands homeless. The Nazis calculated that Britain would break, that terror from the skies would force surrender. And it almost worked. In the underground shelters, families huddled in darkness, children crying, adults praying. How much longer can we take this? Then, one morning, they saw him, walking through the smoke and rubble, no bodyguards rushing him to safety, no armored car nearby. Just Winston Churchill, 65 years old, cigar clenched in his teeth, walking deliberately through the devastation. He stopped where a family was digging through ruins of their home. An elderly woman looked up, recognized him, tears streaming down her soot-covered face. Churchill approached her, placed his hand on her shoulder. Then he turned to the growing crowd and shouted, "Are we downhearted?" The woman straightened her back. Others stopped digging. More emerged from the rubble. "No!" they roared back. Churchill raised his hand in the V for victory sign. In that moment, something changed. Not through strategy, not through military victory, but through presence, through showing that if a 65-year-old man who'd failed for decades refused to quit, then they could refuse to quit too. Churchill went on the radio. His speeches became the voice of defiance. "We shall fight on the beaches. We shall fight on the landing grounds. We shall fight in the fields and in the streets. We shall fight in the hills. We shall never surrender." Notice he didn't say, "We shall win." He said, "We shall fight," because sometimes the victory is simply in refusing to surrender. But behind closed doors, Churchill battled his own demons. The black dog of depression stalked him constantly. His secretary once found him weeping at his desk, reading casualty reports. "Every name is a mother's son," he whispered. Then he wiped his eyes, lit a cigar, and went back to making the next impossible decision. That's the third lesson. Never giving up doesn't mean never feeling despair. It means moving forward despite the despair. The war didn't end quickly. Britain endured 5 more years of grinding conflict. Churchill made mistakes, miscalculations, decisions that haunted him, but he never stopped, never surrendered, never gave in. Build to victory. May 8th, 1945. Victory in Europe. Nazi Germany defeated. Britain battered but alive. Churchill stood before massive crowds in London. The man they'd mocked as a has-been. The 65-year-old relic who should have retired. He'd led them through the darkest hours of human history. 2 months later, Britain held elections. Churchill, the war hero, the man who'd saved the nation, stood for re-election. He lost. The British people voted him out of office. Churchill was devastated. After everything, all the sacrifice, the sleepless nights, the decisions that aged him decades, they'd rejected him. Most men would have been broken, bitter, angry. Instead, Churchill said, "I have no regrets. I leave office with my duty done. The people have spoken, and in a democracy, that's how it should be." Then he went home and started painting again. Because here's the final truth about never giving up. It's not about external validation. It's not about winning every time. It's about continuing regardless of outcome. Churchill wasn't done. In 1951, at age 76, he became prime minister again, served until age 80, won the Nobel Prize in Literature at 79, painted over 500 canvases, wrote dozens of books, lived until 90. Let's count Churchill's failures. Beaten and humiliated as a child, called stupid by his father. Failed entrance exams twice, Gallipoli disaster, 100,000 dead, forced to resign in disgrace, spent 10 years in political wilderness, mocked as a warmonger and drunk, lost election right after winning World War II. Any one of these failures would break most people. Churchill endured all of them, and still became one of history's greatest leaders. How? Principle number 1. Failure is not permanent unless you quit. Gallipoli destroyed Churchill's reputation. But it didn't destroy Churchill. He learned from it, grew from it, used those lessons to plan D-Day successfully 29 years later. Principle number 2. Other people's opinions are not your destiny. His father called him a failure. Teachers agreed. Later, politicians mocked him. Churchill chose not to believe them. Not because he was arrogant, but because he knew they didn't define him. Principle number 3. Depression is not defeat. The black dog stalked Churchill his entire life. He struggled with mental health in an era when no one talked about it, but he functioning despite it, leading despite it. achieving despite it. Churchill once said, "If you're going through hell, keep going." Not because the path gets easier, but because stopping in hell means staying in hell. Principle number 4. Age is not a barrier. Churchill was 65 when he became Prime Minister. In his 70s and 80s, he continued leading, writing, creating. Society told him to retire, to accept that his time was past. He ignored society. Principle number 5. The comeback is always possible. From 7-year-old boy being beaten at school, to 40-year-old butcher forced to resign, to 60-year-old has-been wandering the wilderness, to 65-year-old savior of Western civilization, every chapter could have been the end. Churchill made each one the beginning. You're watching this video for a reason. Maybe you failed. Maybe you're failing right now. Maybe people have told you to quit, to accept defeat, to lower your expectations. Maybe you're older than you wanted to be when you achieved your dreams. Maybe depression makes every day a battle. Maybe you've tried and failed so many times you're not sure you can try again. Churchill's life proves something vital. None of that matters. Not your age, not your failures, not other people's opinions, not your mental health struggles, not how many times you've fallen. The only thing that matters is whether you get up one more time. Churchill didn't save Britain because he was smarter than everyone else. He saved Britain because he refused to quit when everyone else would have. That's it. That's the whole secret. In 1954, on his 81st birthday, Parliament held a ceremony honoring Churchill. A young MP asked him, "Sir, what's the secret to your success?" Churchill thought for a moment, then smiled. "I'm not talented. I'm not a genius. I just never gave in. When I was beaten as a boy, I didn't give in. When I failed exams, I didn't give in. When Gallipoli destroyed me, I didn't give in. When the Nazis threatened to invade, I didn't give in. That's the only secret. Never, never, never give in." Then he added, "Except to convictions of honor and good sense." Even in persistence, Churchill remained wise. Winston Churchill died on January 24, 1965. His state funeral was the largest Britain had ever seen. But his greatest legacy isn't monuments or ceremonies. It's proof that persistence matters more than talent, that refusing to quit can change the world, that one person, standing firm when everyone else surrenders, can alter the course of history. You have something in your life right now that feels impossible, a dream that seems dead, a goal that feels too far, a failure that seems final. Churchill's life asks you one question. What if you just didn't quit? Not because success is guaranteed, but because giving up guarantees failure.